السلام عليكم.
السلام عليكم.
How you going? السلام عليكم. How you going, Sidi? Looking
I'm
fresh.
okay.
Ready for
Alhamdulillah.
Jumu'ah?
Yeah. Yeah.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah. All right. Without further ado, just give a quick introduction for Sidi Ishaq. So, Mohammed Isaaq is the founder and the instructor of Knowing Yourself program. He's a self-development specialist and a teacher. He's born and raised in Birmingham, UK. Following his postgraduate studies in education, he has had the privilege of pursuing his studies under various teachers in the UK and abroad, including Morocco, Jordan, and Yemen. He has completed his diploma in Islamic Psychology at Cambridge Muslim College last year. Yes, he graduated last year. Yep, graduated last year. And he has been teaching Islamic medicine, theology, and Arabic alongside other projects. He has now delivered the program in over, can we say, 50 countries?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, with maybe like can we put it up to maybe 50,000 participants so far?
Yeah, maybe maybe less than that, I think.
Yeah, let's khair, inshallah. Inshallah. There'll be more to come, inshallah. So hopefully, after today's class, inshallah, more people will be aware of the programs that you do. And inshallah, once you decide to give us dates for your visit to Australia, inshallah, then the team is ready, inshallah, to host you and to bring you to bring you down and be at your service, inshallah.
Sure.
Also, Ustadh is going to be doing a course on Monday. It's a four-part series with one of the family therapists here in Sydney. It will be an online course. We will be posting the link in the chat and into the main chats, inshallah. So if you're keen, please do join. Without further ado, see this hat. The stage is yours.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم وصلي عليه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah everybody. I hope everybody's good, and I do apologize for the delay today. Unfortunately on the Instagram, I think as much as the poster had a particular time, I think the Instagram actually had a slightly different time. I think it didn't consider the BST, British Standard Time, so it actually said that the session will be a little bit later. So that threw me off just a little bit with the timing. But anyway, alhamdulillah, we're here. And inshallah, we're going to have a nice little bit of a conversation. So I'll start with a bit of a presentation, and then won't necessarily be a presentation. I don't really want to do a death by PowerPoint already. But inshallah, I'll go through a particular notion, and some of it you'll be a little bit familiar with. But I really want to highlight some of the philosophical underpinnings, inshallah, in the context of our conversation and sort of the implications of it. It's always important to know the kind of audience that one is addressing. I think just in any conversation. However, I'm not too familiar necessarily with the background of everybody who's listening. So I'm going to keep it a little bit between a space of assuming that some of you are not familiar with some of the concepts that I'm going to cover, and at the same time, some of you are super familiar with some of the concepts. So it'll be a little bit in between. And then, Ahmed, do we have a Q&A of any sort? Yeah. So according to the Q&A, I think we'll allow that to then go into whatever level of conversation we'll go into. Ahmed, does that sound fine as an approach? Is that okay? Yeah. All right, inshallah. So hopefully that kind of is more encompassing for everybody else. But I'd like to extend my gratitude to all of you to take out your time to be here. Inshallah, I would say this Friday morning, but I guess it's this Friday evening. I guess there's a degree of relativity to experiences, and that leads us into really maybe understanding, therefore, we come to the idea of understanding each other. How aware are we of the particular factors, the particular perspectives, the particulars of our experiences? So as much as there's a universal aspect that we're all experiencing time, there's always a difference and there's always some specifics. So inshallah, that goes into really starting to understand when we look at this idea of fragmented frameworks. Because if we build a worldview of any sort based upon universals, we then have a universal framework, right? So if I understand the universal nature of a human being, all of the universal things that human beings all experience, and I create a framework of that, right, based off universals, then I will have a perspective or a framework that encompasses all the universal aspects of a human being. And as a result of that, beyond time or place, whatever I produce or whatever I'll speak about will be relevant to all human beings. For example, I could sit and talk about the experience of death, the experience of sadness, the experience of loss, and I could start my conversation from those concepts, realities, and I could create essentially what would be a framework addressing those particular factors, right? But those are universals. As I create that, once I speak to you about it, every single one of you experience loss, every single one of you experience death, every single one of you experience one of those concepts. Those are universals. That is exactly what all universal concepts do, all universal frameworks do. So universal frameworks, therefore, will be a universal framework will be far more encompassing and far more considering of the overall factors of life. So, for example, so as I mentioned that every single one of you will experience death, every single one of you experiences loss, and so on. So when you look at Islam or Islamic frameworks, most religious frameworks, many of them would be universal frameworks, which is why they apply beyond time and place. The idea of a universal of any sort is that it's beyond time and place. It's not exclusive to a particular time or a particular place to experience that. And therefore, anything that's formed from that will also have the same impact, such as the work of Maulana Rumi, the great poet, the great knower of God, and many other scholarly contributions will have, many of them will have this universal aspect to them, which is why they last over such a long period of time and the impact is so fruitful over a long period of time, irrespective of time and place. Then there are what we would call particular-based frameworks. These particular-based frameworks will draw upon the particulars of a particular time and place. And as a result, would propose a framework or a solution or something of that time and place. And as a result, would find a degree of success because they would be answering those particular questions. However, when time and places, when either times change or place changes, those frameworks would deem to be insignificant or would be now expired. And so there would be a further investigation into the particulars of the next time or the next place. And as a result, there would be a new perspective. Now, most of science ends up doing that because a lot of modern science is rooted in empiricism. Because it's rooted in empiricism, it's rooted in observations and perspectives. What it does is it's limited. Right? Aristotle says that that the degree of accuracy of a knowledge will always be to the degree of accuracy of the tool in accessing that. So if I was to use my eyes and my perspectives of my eyes or my empirical judgments, my observation of things based upon my view, my perspective, my eyes, observation, empirical judgments, if I was to follow that, it would always be to the degree of how accurate empirical observations are, right? There's many things that I cannot see that exist. So that would already start to skew the degree of accuracy. Not to say that there's no degree of accuracy, it's how accurate is that. If that's my only mode of pursuing or coming to know truths, well then my pursuit of knowing a thing will always be a little bit limited. So if the human being is what I'm seeking here, and my pursuit is to understand the inner workings of the human being, then all that I will conclude about the human being will be particulars based on what I see. And I will conclude ultimate realities about this human being until I see more empirical data, more data, and therefore my conclusion will change. This is really the spirit of empiricism and science, that we have working models or answers until we get new sets of information, and then we change with that. right? And that's really how science works. So that's a particular-based model, right? Because it works on certain particulars, but how long will that last? Now, alone, we could see a big difference between two approaches, right? Especially in the context of the human being. We have a particular based, and then we have maybe what the opposite particular would be universal based. What would that conclude? That would conclude that this is a model that works for a while versus models that work for a lot longer, right? Hopefully till eternity, right? Based upon your medium. If your medium is Quran, for example, the revelation, the unchanged word from God, then you have a metric that will be beyond time and place and will have universal truths in there, right? For example, one of the things being where God says that when they ask you about the spirit, tell them we've been given little knowledge about it. So to delve into the essence of the spirit will always be something that the human beings will fall short in because we've already been told in advance that this is an essence. It's very difficult to navigate. And anyone who ever tries to navigate it, really, they find quite odd answers, not necessarily wrong, and many of them I'm sure are right as well, but they're a bit difficult to explain. And that's because the nature of the spirit itself is sometimes a little bit beyond our experience. So we can, before we get into any of that, right, I'm just gonna slow down a little bit. So we have this spirit, we have all these concepts, we have an approach that we're taking and understanding. If I study the science of the spirit, what was the science of the spirit called? In English, the science of the spirit is called psychology, right? It's not the science of the mind, as I'm sure many of you are aware, that the word psyche comes from the Greek word, which means the departed spirit. So psychology is the study of the departed spirit. That human beings always were aware that the mind and the soul were never the separate reality, but rather evidence of function, the animating, the animus, the thing that animated a human being into action was the spirit. So there was, and so therefore the study of the mind was the study of the spirit, and the study of emotions was not chemical reactions. To understand emotions was to understand a far deeper reality. The sadness that one carries, the happiness that one carries, the hope that one carries is entirely linked to one's spiritual reality, purpose, perspectives, qibla, orientation, right? Tawajjuh, what with the idea in which one faces constantly at a deeper level of one's existence. What one wakes up for would be indicative of one's of what one is worshipping, right? The great Junaid al-Baghdadi, the great superstar, he said that uh, uh, that um, to know what one's ma'bud is, to know what one's thing we're worshipped is to recognize the first thing that your mind goes to when you are in panic. Right? When you find yourself panicking, the first thing you think, oh bugger, right? And then the first thing that your mind goes to, that will be indicative of where you have considered your most of your deeper reality's worth. It's being exchanged in our tradition. The idea of deen itself, the word religion is not really religion, but rather it's a way of life. But not just a way of life, it's almost, you could say, the philosophy, the way you've gone about in the pursuit of something, or the way you have exchanged your life for. That's why the word dana is to exchange. That's why a place where you do trading, right? Then the place when you do dana consistently, because we're all traders, the Prophet ﷺ said every one of you is a trader. Every morning you trade something. This idea of trading is indicative of the city. So your whole being is a city, therefore, that's where Medina comes from, the one where you do dana, where you do trading, and dain means a loan because you're paying off a debt for your existence. Right. So every one of us creates a city simply off the back of that. Either if you trade your breath for good stuff, right? That's whatever you're trading for, that's your deen. If you're trading for good stuff, then you'll create a virtuous Medina. So if you trade it for virtuous things, you become a Medina Munawwara. And if you trade it for things that are vice, you will create vice city. right? You'll create a city within yourself that's exchanging for vice. So how does this link with the idea of psychology or the idea of understanding ourselves? If we are pursuing the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of the spirit, the knowledge of these realities, what I just mentioned about that what we're exchanging ourselves for all these things, if we understand these things from an empirical, just an exclusively empirical or an empirical and rational perspective, we will get by default a slightly reductive perspective of the human being simply to the reductive nature of the pursuits of the tools itself, meaning that the empirical realities, and this is where the great Imam Ghazali speaks about in the Deliverance from Error when he went on this pursuit of so if my life is to know God, what is knowing? What types of knowing can I have? And then he looked at, well, I know things from my eyes. And he looked at a shadow and he said, and he waited and he saw the shadow move. He said, aha. He said, my eyes are constantly deceived. One of the first ways in which I receive deceiving experiences is from my eyes, because my eyes show me one thing and then very quickly that thing changes. So I cannot depend on my empirical evidence. So then, you go on this whole interesting pursuit. And so he goes on his journey with that. My point being is that if we look at the idea in the secular world and the secularized framework, that in the secularized framework, this in the Enlightenment period, which is the foundations really of Western philosophy, and again not linked specifically to the West or the East or the Western or the Eastern, this is not the point. But in terms of ideologies, we find that its origination, a lot of it was impacted by the empirical or the secular worldview. And due to the secular worldview, what happened was there was a materialistic lens to understanding. So how do we know the human being has this animus, this movement? How do we know that the human being has a spirit within it, or at least a mind? Because we see the human being behaving. That's what science would say. We see the action. Yeah, the secularists, we say the evidence for existence is the fact that I am having some movement of some sort, right? So cogito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. These were, that my existence is predicated upon the fact that I can think, that I know that there's something taking place, therefore I have an existence. And we would say that doesn't necessarily, that you don't have to necessarily think to have evidence for the fact that you have existence. You didn't have to conclude that it was already a given, because if it's cogito that I thought, uh, doesn't it presuppose that there was an existence in the first place? So how could I say, therefore I am? You're concluding something that's a part of the initial part of the proposition, right? So it then created this framework of the human being, that there's the body, and then because of some material judgment, we're seeing the human being say, hello, bye bye, right? We then conclude, therefore, then also due to materialistic lens, there are cognitive factors, and those cognitive factors determine that there is a mind and there's some action taking place. Now, as cool as this is, this starts to neglect deeper existential, spiritual, and moral dimensions, because the mind and the body does not necessarily bring about and recognize the objective truths of spirit. For example, if anyone ever says to you, "Oh, where's the hard evidence, buddy? Where's the hard evidence?" You say to them, "Where's the hard evidence for your soul?" Like we're not empiricists here. The hard evidence is not necessarily going to be a report or some research funded by whoever felt like funding it. قال الله وقال Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? That Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said. But if you don't consider those as hard evidence, then you will start to create a dissonance between what you actually believe to be true and what's, by English definition, a personal set of coping mechanisms, aka belief. We don't roll like that. We don't see the reality like that. We don't see as a personal perspective. We see as حقائق الأشياء ثابتة. The realities of things are already established. وَالْعِلْمُ بِهَا مُتَحَقِّقًا, as the great Imam Nasafi said. So if we take this kind of framing that we're seeing, where you've got that reality is already established, as Imam Nasafi would say, and this spiritual, already kind of understanding that there's a spiritual realm, blah, 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 versus this empirical and logical worldview that is rooted in empirical and rational, personal truths, right? With a low small t, not a capital T. What it results in the makeup of the human being then therefore becomes something that's purely relative to one's personal evidences and creates a particular based framework. Hey, well, what we've noticed is there are 5 love languages, right? Or we've noticed that there are, and these become particular frameworks. Give me words of affirmation long enough, and after 2 years, I don't want to hear no words anymore, buddy. I want to see gifts, right? So you find that all these particular based frameworks will be reductive perspectives that work for a while, and then what? Always, anything you follow that's not from a holistic. See, this idea of reductive is fragmented. It creates, oh, wait, have somebody separate for your body and somebody separate for your mind. And as for your personal spiritual coping mechanisms, yeah, you can have like a sheikh. Right? But just remember, your sheikh just kind of gives you personal random things. The real deal is hard evidence, buddy. You need a paracetamol, right? You should go see a therapist. Like those are considered truths in a particular society versus, so this is a fragmented understanding of the human being. You need somebody for this, somebody for that, somebody for that. And so therefore one has a slightly a fragmented, disconnected living where the prayer mat or the prayer room is only for the prayer, the musalla is only for the prayer room. Do you get that? The musalla is only for the prayer room. And as for the other parts of your life, we don't necessarily need to have a prayer room for that. I have my food doesn't really need to have this perspective on it. Whereas from the Islamic tradition, the food is the first medicine, right? Said that it's the head of all medicine is your diet. And we have complete frameworks in the Islamic framework on because it's a deen, it's a complete way of looking at things. So it has answers for every single aspect of your life, which are congruent in principle. In first principles, they're all congruent. Not that your mind is this, but your body is this, but you have a new therapist who's trying some other technique and and you're having these separate, and so you get reduced to the different aspects and you become a guinea pig to working models. Well, that's amazing, really, if you think about it. Hey, why don't you smoke? Oh, no, now we find out smoking's bad. Stop smoking, but try a vape. Oh, no, we find out vapes are bad now. Or try something else. And you become a guinea pig to somebody else's lab experiment and working conclusions, right? Which is why the vaccines, in philosophical terms, the vaccine therefore could be legitimized, for example, because it's a reaction. Right. Whereas we're not supposed to live as reactions, and certainly not as somebody else's reactions, and so when you find these psychological foundations coming off the back of somebody's personal working model, and even coaches and these therapists that are absorbing frameworks that are really a reaction to their own experience, pranced around as if it's the truth and the solution. And so they fragmented realities, creating fragmented human beings with dissonance. And even when people adopt a religious framework, their religion fits in one of these 5 categories and it doesn't apply in the other ones. And so you still have a reductive perspective, a fragmented human being. And in this reductionism is not it's something that's been assessed by many different people when looking at the problem of a secularized perspective or secular psychology. In fact, what we also need to now understand is there's no such thing as Islamic psychology. Sorry, guys, you got to rebrand. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, get rid of Islamic psychology. Why? Because true psychology is Islamic psychology. And psychology that's hijacked the term. Why don't you stick it on psychology and say, hey, you psychology, you're not psychology, you're reductive psychology or secular psychology, buddy. Don't walk around and prance around like you are psychology in its true sense. By definition, you don't even believe in the spirit. So why don't you call it mindology, right? Because psyche means the spirit. Anyway, before I start another rant there, this idea of reductive fragmentation in Islam, what would be the philosophical opposite to reductionism? To fragmenting a human being would be making one. That's where the word holistic, and that's literally the word tawheed. Tawheed literally wahada yuwahidu Tawheed is to make one, that is the tradition of the Muslim fundamentally, is to keep a holistic perspective, to understand that the paracetamol that one takes has a mental and a spiritual reality and will affect the mental and the spiritual just by consuming it. And in the same manner, a spiritual medicine will affect my mental and my physical, and that these things are not separate. And this is the wonderful beauty of the great Imam Ghazali and many of the other scholars, bringing this holistic experience back into it. Along with that, what it also does, I'm going to just kind of bring it a little bit home now, just so I've done the deeper overall universal stuff. I'll spend maybe 10 minutes kind of bringing it a little bit back to the kind of key aspects that separates what would be true psychology, or if you're really sensitive, you can call it Islamic psychology, and what would be secular psychology. Okay, let's just look at some of the fundamental differences when we look at fragmented frameworks to fragmented beings. The fragmented frameworks of secular psychology are not considerate of the nafs and of the spirit. And so where does submission, where does tazkiyat nafs, where is that in your CBT framework? Right? If I'm trying to navigate something, if I'm trying to find out how to navigate something, how do I go from navigating what I'm navigating, whether I'm getting over Alush not marrying me, or Alush beating me up, or whatever, right, whatever problems that we navigate in life. And after we call the police, we have to navigate the mental and spiritual the effects of an experience. So as we go to our therapists and so on, we have to consider that these frameworks that are being proposed to us, how do we um, how do we navigate the spiritual implications of such an experience, right? And how do we navigate within that the nafs? If your framework does not consider those two things, then buddy, you're in trouble, because your holistic psychological framework will propose maybe even a further nafsi response. Nafs is the lower self, which is the ego, the lower self. So if I follow a framework which the lower self is further exasperated or promoted, then I'll have more problems, because the more nafs feeding I ever do in life, the more problems I'll have in life. Everybody should know this. This is like a maxim you could take in life. More, they would say more money, more problems, right? Or for us, as we say, more nafs feeding, more problems, which includes money and other such ventures and pursuits in life, right? The more the dunya pursuits that I do, the more problems that I'll end up having in life, right? So, that's just one aspect. Then there's the idea of, for example, I'll give you another example, this idea of self-care. If I pursue this idea of self-care, this idea of navigating and taking care of myself, how and when do what boundaries do I have when I navigate that? Is it fair that I have my sibling is in need, or my parents are in need for something, or my children are in need, but I'm prioritizing self-care at this point, while my house burns while I'm in my bathtub with my rubber duckies, having my self-care experience. Like there are moral obligations that one has. And when we look at self-care, we should almost now replace this idea of self-care with higher self-care. So we understand that there's different parts to the self. There's the higher self, which is the ruh. So self-care linked to the ruh would be anything that creates a greater moral reality within yourself, which could be a hydrotherapy. We could be lying in the bath with rubber ducks. I'm not against that, right? But it could also be the ability to make a cup of tea for somebody when you feel like you don't have the capacity for it. You might say, okay, maybe I've got one more tea in me, and then I could do that. That level of higher self-activation, that's what a different degree of self-care, which you don't have in a fragmented understanding. Because if you just follow self-care, you follow a whole routine which is self-indulging without the guidelines. And what happens then? Without the guidelines of right and wrong, you just fall into another a little patch of problems, because now you have to deal with the fact that you sat there, had all your cookies, could have given them away. Now you feel a bit sick because eating all the cookies yourself is always problematic. The Prophet ﷺ said, or general advice, that 1/3 with food, 1/3 with drink, and 1/3 with air, meaning we should never be fully satisfying ourselves with food of any sort or any type of consumption should never be to our fullest. Take enough that's good enough for you, and then share the rest of it and help others because you will live with those virtues versus taking everything for yourself. Oh, but my self-care routine is I gotta have 5 cookies. You determine that, not what the other person has said. Because if you keep having 5 cookies when you could have given 3 of them away and had 2, or just given 4 of them away and had 1, you probably would have been in a better state physically, morally, and spiritually. So the idea of the spirit and the nafs is already something that the fragmented being ends up becoming more fragmented on, and the holistic being contains and navigates them, doesn't reject them, understands, cool, I'm a cookie lover, I gotta have some cookies, but I don't become a cookie monster, right? I don't want to fall into cookie monster business. The other thing that's a massive part of this, am I okay with time, Ahmed? How long do I have for the? Okay, just keep me updated, inshallah, please. Thank you. The second fundamental difference between a fragmented secular psychological perspective versus a truly holistic, and again, when I mean holistic here, I don't mean taking a secular framework and sticking Islam on it and say, like, that's not what we talk about when we talk about Islamic spirituality or Islamic psychology or true psychology. True psychology has to be foundations upward rather than top down. It has to be bottom up approach. So true research by truly well-informed scholars or scholarship is the pursuit here. And there are many. I'm sure that many of them come under ISIP programs. So there's many wonderful people out there, inshallah. I will keep that for Q&A later. The second thing that you see here is the lack of purpose and meaning. One of the wonderful things that you find is that the Islamic framework adds meaning onto everything. Sorry, let me clarify. That's from our secular perspectives, it adds meaning. From an Islamic perspective, it reminds you there is meaning in everything. There is meaning. There is ultimate, unlimited significance of everything in every moment. Kullu yawmin huwa fi sha'an. In every moment, he is engaged in a great affair. Every single thing has a great reason why it exists. I have a phone here, which is used not just simply for my phone uses, but now currently it's a tool for learning in this moment, right? That's why Allah placed it here. The difference between that and something else that's here, like a perfume, for example, right? These would all be hashtag Dead and Benji. They do lots of wonderful perfumes. If you haven't got them already, you should definitely look into them. But the idea being is there's great meaning in these things. If I take a materialistic perspective on reality and materialism, right? And worse than that is off the back of a material framework, you have this romantic movement, which is basically starting to create meaning in things. This idea of I create meaning in things. We don't look at creating meaning. We call it discovering meaning. You don't create your reality, you discover your reality. Because if you try to create a meaning, you maybe create a meaning that's not actually exclusive to that thing. And as a result of that, you create another problem. That's what romanticizing and it's like basically looking for great truths and beauty and justice and all these wonderful romantic and sensations and feelings and all these wonderful things that are within Islam, but Islam has them in things that are good for you and not in things that are bad for you. But when you take it in a post-material worldview where they said, oh, but can we still have those things? Now I can place all those wonderful things in that which it probably isn't in. So I could find all these truth, justice, beauty, all this stuff in morally bad things. That's basically summed up in the modern times with modern art, modern beauty, modern movies where you have characters now, villains are now becoming heroes. That's because you're looking for sentiments but you're applying them to places where they shouldn't necessarily exist because somebody who does bad has accumulated a degree of bad, right? We don't completely judge them beyond that, but we definitely judge at that point that is a bad thing to do. right? So as much as you don't hate the player, we hate the game, right? But if you've been playing that game for a long time, buddy, you're a criminal, right? Right, right. We don't just say, hey, it's okay, all right. You beat up 5 people, it's okay. No, no, no. Hey, you got to do some time now. You got to go to the police. So there's moral implications here. So when you take now this idea of meaning and all these beautiful things, what this does fundamentally in a fundamental the human is that it affects the idea of purpose and meaning. So human beings now, this idea of, well, why should I see the therapist? Why should I be better? Is it simply for feelings, or or can I, uh, can I accept that I can do this bad, and because I feel okay, isn't that enough? Isn't it enough for me to feel okay? Why is it that, like, who said self-pleasure itself, in and of itself, is wrong? These types of arguments start to form. I'm not harming anybody. I'm not harming anybody else. I'm just doing it myself. So isn't this okay? It starts off like a nice notion and sensation, and then it becomes problematic due to the logical conclusions of it, right? Because in our tradition, for example, doing a sin is actually, in our understanding, an oppression to the self. That's why we call it dhulm, because you are oppressing the self. But if you don't have a framework that considers that to be an oppression of the self, then we can start to make these arguments. Well, I'm doing what I want to do, but can I not, isn't it okay? And so so your religion and all its moral implications and purpose and meanings are left to the side, and functions are now, what do we see them? Meaningless in ultimate affairs and purposeless in ultimate affairs. Now, if it's purposeless and meaningless in ultimate affairs, what does that sound like to you? It's basically limit, because ultimate affairs is the akhirah. So you take out all ukhrawiya conclusions for life, and you are making me far more rooted in dunya, worldly metric. And if you are making me more dunya and worldly metric to understand what life's worth and life's purpose and meaning, well then, why can't I have all the cookies? Everybody else is having all their cookies, right? Why can't I just please myself? Everybody else is pleasing, and these become the new metrics. And if people are not careful, people won't realize, but their own children will inherit these frameworks, because you are creating a worldview that's fragmented. And remember, fragmentation leads to more fragmentation. Extremism begets extremism. This is why it's so interesting that lam yalid wa lam yulad. He does not beget, and nor does anyone beget him. Right? That this is that it's like a constancy. There's no conclusions here that lead to X, Y, and Z. It is. This is. This is not predicated on another thing, for example. Okay. And so what this does is, when you bring in really the true meaning, you start to bring in the idea of cosmic plan. Cosmic plan being Allah's ultimate plan in things. You start to alleviate existential distress. Allah, existential distress, people. That is the root trauma of everybody. All cacophonies in this world, all disharmony, frustration stem from the fact that I probably haven't prayed, or I probably haven't fasted, or I'm ultimately disconnected from God. And that existential distress can be alleviated from greater spiritual navigation, and foster a resilience to the degree that cosmic wonders, right? You are ukhrawiya, you are from the next life. So your ability and resilience and psychological framing of this world is rooted in a whole other metric. It's called Jannah metrics. Jannah metrics. What are Jannah metrics? Jannah metrics are that when you rock up on Yom Qiyamah and you see people suffering and cashing in for their suffering, you say, oh man, I wish I could have a bit more suffering in this world. Genuinely, genuinely, you'll say, wait, wait, it was for that. Oh, okay. Oh man, I wish I had some more. I mean, what a metric. ولنبلونكم شيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات. Right, we will surely test them in hunger of some sort, in of some sort, right? How many of you have hunger? You have food, but you still have hunger of a social connection, which is why you're glued to a Zoom screen right now. Tell us, ISIP, guide me, right, is the pursuit of your soul in this very moment as your heart yearns to the screen to connect in some capacity, right? والجوع and خوف and fears that we all have, fear that drives us to glue ourselves to a screen. Subhanallah. Fears that we all have. خوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال and loss in yourself you will experience. Gray hairs will come. What do you do then? You either crap at them, collagen, 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 right? Or do we say, all right, let's embrace level 41 or 52 or 36 or whatever it may be, right? النقص من الأموال والأموال, right? And in your wealth, you will find up and down. So don't let the stock market dictate your heart, right? Or your trade, your personal trade, your deen, which is amazing, huh? Your adyan. Don't don't let the trading affect your trading. Because if your trading is linked into the trading of the mal, when the mal is up, what do you say, God? I love you, God. And when the trading is down, you say, God, I won't say anything. Oh, huh? What? You say, I love you no matter what. Alhamdulillah. Right? You wake up every morning, the prophetic practice. Allahumma inni asbahtu minka fi ni'matin wa afiyatin wa sitr. I woke up in your ni'mah. I have my hands. I have my feet. He makes you sound like a singer, right? اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. You read this 3 times in the morning, the Prophet said, you have fulfilled your shukr to God for the day. Look at that degree of existence, the empowerment that comes from this. You read, اللهم إني أسألك من فجاءة الخير وأعوذ بك من فجاءة الشر, right? I seek sudden good and sudden bad. Why do we say sudden good? Because we know what we're essentially saying is, God, I just don't want, I don't want just good. Treat me, let me, surprise me, God. Like what a mentality it creates. This is what we call holistic frameworks. I can go on and on. I'm just going to try to wrap up the 2 more points, inshallah. Moral and ethical. The idea of the sabr that we were mentioning here, the sabr, the gratitude, shukr, and the tawakkul, all promote a type of a well-being that you'll cash in this world and the next world. But opposite to that, if you have a relative moral framework, which is what a modern worldview, a secular worldview creates, because God and religion is what dictates good and bad. When you take that out the picture, what determines good and bad in your particular model of healing or whatever, where's the good and bad in that? When you don't have good and bad in that, what does that create? Well, it creates either one, your good and bad is based upon material, hence the one of the most causes probably doing better in life, and the one with the least causes doing what bad in life? What? Right? These deeper moral conclusions based off material, because we've been trained in the material. Do you understand what I'm saying, people? We also have this individualism. The more individual I live for myself, the more good it will be for me. Sisters, brothers and sisters, live for yourselves and therefore you will be better. Why? Because Disney told you that. That's why. That's not a complete Islamic framework to live for yourself. Islam says, "Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara," save yourself and your family from the fire. Even then, when you're saving yourself from the fire, Allah's saying, and your family, right? Don't be that selfish. Amazing. Uh, So this idea of individualism can be highly proper. Materialism, individualism, and then romanticism, the feelings. I feel good, right? So when Descartes was saying cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, this eventually concluded for the feelers, well, Descartes, I feel therefore I am, which then leads to that if you don't allow me to feel good, Ahmed, then if I'm not feeling good, am I? Let's take some more drugs, people, right? Because now I feel, therefore I am, right? Did you really go if you didn't post about it? Did you really go? Did it exist if you didn't post about it? I post, therefore I am. So did you really experience? I experienced, therefore I am. Everything linked in sentiments. Me and Ahmed, when we saw each other, we saw violence. Therefore, I must marry Ahmed. What? What? I felt, therefore we are. And then when we cease to experience violence, Ahmed, do we part ways because our whole relationship was bound upon feelings? Where are the rights? Where are the hukuk? And if you and me are brothers, Ahmed, if we are brothers here, what would be the case of a uh, of a of a male to female relationship? Then when we feel so much excitement, we feel the chemical rush, and we're trained upon feelings, we get married, and now when we don't feel, we say bye. Worse, actually, because you don't make me feel good, and I like this phone, and I like to use it, and you don't want me to feel this in some capacity. Therefore, if you say to me, put the phone down, and this is feeling good, now I put it down, I feel bad. And if my morality is feeling good, therefore good, and feeling bad, therefore bad, then when you told me to put my phone down, did you make me feel so bad that you oppressed me? Oh, wait, now I'm morally justified in saying, see you later, buddy. In fact, I'm going to take you to court. You're a criminal. Why? Because you made me feel bad. What is going on here? This is the philosophical underpinnings of many things that would be problematic philosophically. And philosophically here, I'm not talking about philosophy here. I'm talking about philosophical terms because this is the underpinnings of the Western philosophy. What we're talking about here is just truth. And the point is, Islam brings feelings and capitalism and feminine and all these in their healthy forms. But any of these isms in and of themselves will create their own problems and worse, moral, ethical crisis. Because according to a psychological framework, sabr is right, a secular psychological framework. Sabr is shukr is, oh, all right, buddy. You go do shukr, and I'll have my Lamborghini. How about that? Right? This is the kind of response, and people will be like, "Oh, yeah, I want a Lamborghini too." Right? And then tawakkul. Whoa, let's not even get started on tawakkul in that context. And it's not even just getting married. Somebody said about getting married. It's about staying married, right? It's about the principle overriding. But if we just look at regulate it by the one aspect and not the other, we experience it by just the feelings and not the principle. The principles are what allow us to continue this journey. But without the principles, we're just looking for feelings and sentiments and projections, and you didn't live up to what I thought you were going to be, etc., etc. I mean, and you set yourself up for problems. And this is the secular way. All right. All right. And then the last bit here is social responsibility and community. Islam encourages strong family and community ties. And so what happens is in a framework, a secularized framework is not about anybody else. In fact, it's all about me. I want a cookie. I want a party. Me, my, now, now, now. This becomes the modern philosophy of the age. For us, the only times you could ever do that when it comes to saving yourself, saving your family from the fire, this type of stuff, trying to make it to the first stuff for prayer. At that time, you got to be selfish. Get out the way, buddy. Right? I'm gonna make it to the front row and the prayer stuff. But other things, so the secular frame reduces it, and the greatest claim that they'll have is from a humanistic perspective. But the paradigms of humanism sometimes will fall short when they're explored, and that's why most humanists in like debate and stuff, unfortunately, and not for their own, I don't have any pride in this. I don't see any pride in human beings being more confused. It's not a win. To prove the other person's confused doesn't make you more doesn't mean you're right or you have more clarity, right? So we should not go out to disprove people. What I'm speaking about here is ideologies that affect us, right? The fragmentations creating a fragmented human being, broken human beings is the point here, right? For us, not necessarily in the context of others and their values, etc. And for us to not necessarily ditch frameworks, that's not the point either. The point is to refine. We're not black and white either. We understand that we can take the hikmah is the lost property of the believer. We take all these wonderful frameworks, take the good from them, and lose that which is not beneficial for ourselves and for humanity. But in the context of the social well-being, I mean, even in the context of the romantic experience. What is it commonly proposed? This idea of, you do you, and this type of stuff. And a lot of these frameworks will not have the moral implications of preference of the self over the other. So even in the pursuit of self-care, for example, if you don't have a good understanding of the nerves and spirit, what does it mean? This pursuit of the nuclear family. I mean, the fact that it's just a nuclear family alone is already an idea. I mean, if it's nuclear, it's probably already toxic anyway, right? That children need the village, they need the parents, they need the grandparents, they need the aunties and uncles, because these are great places of lessons. And if you take out those people, who do they go to? Who will they go to? And very few people can survive these worlds unless they're in very healthy environments. But in the name of self-care and in the name of taking care of oneself and blah, 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 people will create problems for the next person. And so what the Islam does is the holistic frames, because you see, the thing is, the idea of a fragmented framework when it comes to community and social is that you will be fragmented, your house will be fragmented from your street. You're so busy, nobody sits with the neighbor anymore, and it's a fragmented street. Fragmented people, hearts will create fragmented homes, which create fragmented people, and as a result, nobody will eat together anymore. Families won't eat together because everybody's eating at their own timing. Fragmented living, fragmented houses, fragmented streets, fragmented societies, and then be surprised why isolation and um, and depression and anxiety and loneliness is through the roof right now. So come join me and Ahmed in our little village in Perth while we create the new society. No, I'm joking. But inshallah, this is where it's going to go to. So anyway, I think I've spoken more than enough today as a bit of a nutshell into the crisis of fragmented frameworks, creating fragmented individuals. Tune in next week for when we see. No, I'm joking. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair for listening. I will stay for any questions. Thank you again for ISIP to set up this wonderful meeting. I know Ahmed, mashallah, was pursuing this and working hard in this as well. I hope you guys found benefit in this. If there's anything good that I said, most certainly it was from my teachers or from my parents. If there's anything bad, most certainly it was from myself and the influence of Disney Channel and Shaitan. All right. I'm probably gonna get sued if I keep saying Disney Channel. I've said this a few times now. I'll be careful. Yeah,
Jazakallah khair, barakallah feek. That was very insightful, mashallah, tabarakallah. And just one point, I remember somebody saying that if everybody gives other people their rights, then they will also receive their right. But if everybody's constantly asking for their own rights, then there's no one to give your right. We have a few questions here. We can go through them quickly. First question goes by, how do we know if the therapist is all right or Islamically accepted?
So what you do is you have to put it on their forehead. And no, look, on the rights thing, I just want to say something. I want to say something very important. Okay. The way the world's gone, every one of us, every single one of us, okay? Every single one of us will feel like our rights are trampled on. You got that? Every single one of us. Just understand that, because we've all been trained to look at our rights before our responsibilities. Every single one of us, our default is, what did the other do wrong, which is why I'm not happy. Not why did I do wrong, which is why I'm not happy, or what did I do wrong, why the other person not happy. We're just trained the opposite way. My general advice for people, after you studied your fiqh class, if God's not made it black and white, then you have no right to make it black and white with human beings. If God has not made it a black and white, a black and white here, you don't have a right to prance around. You can do it with yourself if you want to, extra hard rules on yourself, making your gray areas black and white for yourself. But you cannot regulate beyond yourself with your children, with your spouse, with your friends, with anybody, with your ex, whatever. You cannot go in prancing around, creating black and white, demanding rights, to which then you will only give rights if you have your rights. This is pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. So first understand you have been trained, you have been skewed to fall into this. You have been skewed to look at your own rights individually and not look at the other's rights. You've been trained in that. I'm not saying don't call the police. I'm not saying stay in places where you're being harmed. I'm not saying that. Don't stay in those places. But harmed has to be actual harm, not just not feeling good is not harm. Because if you do that, you will lose your faith. Do you understand that? Because faith won't always make you feel good. Feel gooding is not a metric. Tell me the greatest people of our tradition, did they feel good all the time? Of course not. We must not make within ourselves our own day to day. If we did, I was with my niece yesterday. She had a class to attend to, online class, and she said, "But I don't feel like it." I said, "Darling, if we go off, we don't feel like it. There can never be a metric ultimately for whether we study in school or not." Do you see where this conversation could go?
I didn't feel like going to school many times, but I
Right?
had
We
to
don't. No, I
go.
didn't feel like. I didn't feel like going to work. I didn't feel like going to. I feel like just sleeping. I feel like doing this. I feel like doing that. But that's not. But that's not how we live life. And from healthy boundaries, do we get the gifts of living and feeling? Feelings will never stay stagnant. Pursuing feelings can never be the end goal because no feelings last. Give me a Lamborghini long enough, I will eventually get bored of it. So how can that ever be a pursuit? To pursue my feelings will only beget more feelings. How do we live then, man? Live off more feelings? That's why TikTok's so successful, because it just keeps giving you hits and feelings. Anyway, Allah's made black and white divorce, right? But that is why there are problems. Okay, I don't know what's going on there. Khawdija, but Khawdija knows what she's talking about. Um, so Allah bless her. Yeah. Sorry, Ahmed, you had a question. Sorry, there was a question. Oh, how do we know a therapist? Uh, Allah bless you, Hajra. Um, I just saw Hajra's comment there. Allah bless you. Um, uh, in terms of like finding a Islamically trained therapist, you have to really just check around the background training of the Islam of the teacher, and so or the therapist, and where have they understood the Islam. So it's all good to have that psychological training, and I'm a fan of that, but you have to have the Islamic training as well. If they at least some type of contextualizing, some type of an Islamic psychology program or something like that. Not necessarily that they've done an alimiya or they've done like many years of study or some years of study, but at least that they have gone through a framework that has made them unlearn the specifics of secularized psychology. So I would highly recommend that you consider where the training has been. Okay, so I hope that answers the question.
Okay, yeah, inshallah. Um, so does that mean you find psychology contradicting religion? No.
I would find that scientism would always contradict holistic tradition. So therefore, science will eventually have within itself a contradiction that Islam doesn't have. So I would say that science itself has a contradiction, but yeah, certainly in an experience, uh, scientism has a contradiction with Islam. Islam has no problem with science. Islam loves science. Islam promoted science. Islam promotes the psychological pursuits in studies and so on and so forth. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we make those the metrics. So at a deeper level, my advice is just do a good Aqidah class. I will be doing an Aqidah class at some point, Ahmed. I didn't do it last year, but I'll be doing it this year. So those of you who do, end up staying in touch, inshallah, whenever that class is available. I don't normally like to plug classes, but I think that I mean, forget studying with me, just do it with anybody, but doing a sound Akida class that allows you to study the foundations of the deen. If you ever get a chance to study with Sheikh Faraz Khan, he's probably the best in this, or you have Sheikh Wissam, I believe in Sydney, who's also very good. And then there's also the chaps from the Why Islam is True crew. Um, that whole movement they have. So these things are all good advices. The Dr. Shuaib, I believe, as well, he's also pretty good at this stuff. So but look into understanding those kind of underpinnings so you can navigate those areas. But don't make it necessarily that science is a contradiction with Islam or Islam is a contradiction with science, but rather understand that Islam appreciates science, it just within its remit, like anything. like anything.
Yep. I just have a couple more questions, just for shortness of time, because I don't want to take too long of your Jum'ah
I'm okay
Azkar and
though.
Awrad. Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
okay. Allahu
Yeah, I'm
Akbar.
all right.
All right.
Our prayers a little bit later, so
Uh,
we've got time. I don't.
Khair, inshallah. So, somebody was just asking, linking back to what you said about the psych being about the soul rather than exclusively the mind. Um, which modern psychological treatments focus on? What would be the best way forward? Should we bring together the mind and the soul and the spirit in treatment of mental health and well-being? And how can this apply to a non-Muslim, and can it apply? I know
Yeah.
it's a
So
bit
look,
heavy loaded.
no, it's okay. Yeah, look, Islam is not exclusive to Muslims first and foremost, right? The Prophet ﷺ is not exclusive to Muslims. He is the rahmah for the whole world, right? So or the whole universe, you could say, right? So Islam, Muslims, and anything Islamic is not exclusive to just Muslims. Meaning, of course, all of this can be for everybody, right? All of this can be for everybody. This pathways to achievement that people are sharing, this is actually a program for children, by the way. This is not for adults. So just want to clarify. Um, that's what I'll say to you. In terms of like a class that you can do with myself, if you really want to kind of go into this journey, then it's probably the Knowing Yourself class, which will be probably it's probably like the most popular class that I teach. So just wanted to clarify there, but that's for young people, by the way, the pathway to achievement.
What's
Um,
the age range you're addressing in that?
I can't remember, but I think it's in the link in the bio. Just to, um, oh, great. Zubaida. Yeah, thank you
Uh, yep.
very much.
Oh, good.
So anyway, and then along with that, um, in terms of modalities, any modality that's created purely from a secular kind of underpinning will already be uh, sh shorter in terms of like what it has to offer. That's where the practitioner brings it to life. So don't worry too much about the modalities. Worry about because modalities, nobody should be like a one-trick pony anyway. Everybody should be training in multiple things and frameworks. And the practitioner should have a range of development so that they can deal with any of these problems. But if you don't have a person who's trained, then you can give them Islamic psychology and then reduce that down. And does that make sense? So that's what I would recommend that you make sure that the person who's trained is trained while in that regard. That makes
Yep.
sense?
Yep. Um, that's actually a really good point you made, because unfortunately um a lot of therapists are usually trained in that one, and they believe in that one, and they just take on to that one, and that's it. You know what I mean? You bring in any other frameworks, they're like, nah, it doesn't work, you know? And that's one thing I've learned with engaging in the Knowing Yourself course with yourself, obviously, and pursuing other modalities that are out there of frameworks, whether it's viewing the world or viewing sickness or viewing health or viewing um, the mind or the soul. It helps give you a more holistic picture and understanding. Um,
But you know,
one of
Ahmed,
the, yeah,
I'll just say as well that what's really interesting is that when you learn different types of knowledge, especially from the Islamic perspective, you also learn what's interesting is that you learn what you don't know. One of the things with this jahil murakkab, this compounded ignorance, when you just kind of study one thing, is you think that's all there is to know. So when you go in, you're less considerate of other perspectives, right? And then you have less tolerance. Isn't that fascinating? Versus when you have sound studies and sound knowledge, you become more tolerant and far more considerate and far more open to other perspectives. Isn't that brilliant?
mm,
That's the
mm,
difference between like an truly Islamic studying. That makes sense.
Sahih. Like 100%, 100%. Someone who studied more sciences, Islamic and non-Islamic ones, have a more holistic approach and understanding. One of the questions here that we have is part of the modern psychology focus on the concept of subconscious. Would you say that the psychodynamic approach of the human, in a way, is a beginning to an understanding of true psychology, the subconscious being the need of the soul?
I would probably have to define some of those terms, but the thing is, you have to also understand that already we're bringing in terms like subconscious, that's defined in a particular way. So what that's like Islamization. We're trying to bring in subconscious, and then is that and it's trying to stick kind of an Islamic connection, but we have to ask ourselves, where does this understanding subconscious come from? Are we defining it correctly? So I would say that it's probably worth looking at defining the paradigm that we're trying to connect it with. If we're looking at it in a general sense, when we say I mean, what's the difference between conscious and subconscious then? Do you know what I mean? So I would say that would require a little bit more study into what's being proposed before we can match it to something. Always remember, you can't match things until you fully understand what those things are, or at least promote and share with somebody else what that thing looks like.
Okay. One one last question here, I think. Could some mental health conditions be mismatched between a natural need or yearn of the spirit and how it's attempted to be fulfilled, or how it's understood?
Can you say that again, please?
Could some mental health conditions be mismatched between the natural need or yearn of the spirit and how it's attempted to be fulfilled and how it's understood?
I mean, if I answer literally, yes.
Right.
But I think the specifics of that would be something a little bit more detailed to what exactly they're referring to, just to clarify.
Khair, inshallah. Well,
I think there's a quick question here by Kareem. I wanted to address it, if that's okay. Are we okay with time?
of course. Yeah.
So Karima said, I don't really understand the trading metaphor. Can you break it down a little bit, especially the Arabic term you mentioned about Medina and Deen or Dina? So the idea being that the word Medina comes from, which means city, links to, is a cognate. So it's the root letters are shared with the idea of Dana, which is to trade, and Deen, which is way of life. So the idea being that our Deen is what we are trading our life for. That's the idea of trading. In Allah ashtara minal mu'minina anfusahum, God has purchased from the believers themselves. So we're already in loan, we are in debt. We have to pay off this debt. So what we trade our life with is how we're paying off our debt, and that which we trade, that which we do the dana for, or by our trading of our life, will be the deen that we're living. So if it's prayer time and I prefer to use my life, my breath for something other than prayer time, then I've traded my life for something other than what is important. So that would be whether I like it or not, that is what I'm living for. That the other thing, if I'm playing PlayStation, if I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm earning money and I'm delaying my prayer for something else, that other thing I've deemed to be more important, more worthy of my breath, and as a result, that is more my deen at this point than the deen itself, deen of Allah, which is Islam. So many things that we are living for will become our deen because we are trading our life for it. And the idea was that every trading that we're doing is like a metaphor. Every trade that we do ultimately will contribute to who we are. And because places of trading, whenever you have places where lots of trading take place, that becomes a city. So because we do lots of trading simply by our breath and by our lives in every moment, I'm trading my time for this sitting here with you guys. So as I trade my time for this sitting here, am I trading it for my self-worship, but I'm the man, I'm speaking, that would be pathetic pursuit, right? And then the city that I create would be a pathetic, because I'll leave this being like, oh man, I just was there to be nafs aggrandized, like Muhammad Isaaq is speaking, Or am I speaking to help people and to offer some guidance in a very limited one-off conversation, and I don't know if I get the chance again, I'd rather stay a little bit extra, because I loved it when my teachers would stay a little bit extra just to answer a few more extra questions. That's akhlaq and just going above and beyond. I like to always go a little bit above and beyond. I used to do this in the gym. I just do this in life because God says, Hal jaza al ihsan illa al ihsan. That if you go above and beyond in excellence, then God always gives you excellence back. So I always feel like
Allahu Akbar.
I cash in these moments, when I go above and beyond.
Subhanallah.
So that's why I always try to just squeeze myself just a little bit more, because I always try to get more fruits out. So, even when I'm tired or I want to go have a cup of tea or something, I'll push myself just a little bit. That's healthy stress. That's a good healthy stress. That's how you stretch yourself, and then you level up in ability. So that would be
Alhamdulillah.
my trading of that would be the Medina that I'm creating, the city that I create. If I do it for those reasons, then I create a Medina that becomes so I trade it for immaterial, beautiful things, which basically makes a Medina al-Munawwara, an illumination, the Anwar, the lights that I seek. But if I trade it for lowly things of vices, then I create a vice city. That I create a city that's full of vices. May Allah save us from that. So that was the idea. Medina shares from the root letters Dana. That's why in Medina you have the Dad, the Ya, and the Noon. The Meme is for a place. So Dana. So that's what it means, a place of trade. Any city is called a city because it's a place of trade, like downtown, etc. Trading takes place.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Well, on that note, it's Maghrib Salah here for us in WA. It's a bit into the Maghrib time, and I think some people have left in South Africa to go pray their Salah for Jum'ah. So Barakallah Fiqh, Jazakallah Khair for giving us your time. If it's okay with you, maybe you can give us an ending for dua. You've got the beginning of the Jum'ah, so
I think you can do the
past.
dua. Ahmed, you do the dua.
خير إن شاء الله. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم، وتب علينا إنك أنت الوهاب الرحيم. يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا ملك يا قدوس يا سلام يا مؤمن يا مهيمن يا عزيز يا جبار يا متكبر يا الله، اغفر لنا ذنوبنا ويسر لنا أمورنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سبلا من اهتدى. اللهم تقبل منا صلاتنا وصيامنا وقيامنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم نسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم نعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع وقلب لا يخشع ونفس لا تشبع ودعاء لا يقبل منه يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سبلا من اهتدى. المغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات. يا Allah, accept from us this time that we have spent learning about you and learning about the different knowledges out there, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. Ya Allah, accept from us and open up the doors for those seeking the true knowledge, Ya Allah, and open up the hearts of the people to accept the knowledge that is beneficial for them wherever it comes from, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سبلا المغفر للمسلمين ومسلمات المؤمنين والأحياء منهم والأموات. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا رحمة أنت الوهاب. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة. آمين يا رب العالمين. Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, we'll catch up soon. Keep us updated about your visit, inshallah. The team and everyone is waiting, inshallah.
Thank you. Allah bless you all. Take care, and thank you again for all of those who attended and listened. Sorry if I wasn't able to answer any more of your questions, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.